Hi, I'm Lisa Singer. I am the Senior Director Events Programming at MediaPost, and this is Brand Insider BTS, where I get to pull back the curtain on some of the most influential women marketers today. And with me is Stephanie McCarty. She is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Taylor Morrison. Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, Lisa. Good morning.
Well, good morning. So first off, I have to say I'm very excited to interview you because I was noticing you're the first CMO ever at Taylor Morrison. That's pretty impressive. Is
I,
that daunting?
I think I didn't know what I was really stepping into to be too afraid. But from experience at other brands, I think I was at University of Phoenix for almost 6 years. And in that time, I believe we had 3 or 4 CMOs. So the first question I had for my CEO when she offered me the position was, I don't want to step into a position that I'm going to be working myself out of. And
Hmm.
she didn't understand it. And I think it's because we've never had a CMO. And she's like, why wouldn't you be successful and stay in that role for as long as you want? And when I gave her some of that background, she understood. But that's when she said right away that she has all the trust and faith in me, and I have a safe space and kind of open box and sandbox to play in. So I think I started off on the right foot, knowing that I had her backing from day
Yep.
one.
Well, no, and that's obviously you want to hear that from the people bringing you in, and just to know. I think that's a good advice for anyone. You can. It's one thing. 'Cause I do believe that women. I've talked about this before on the show, where they tend to look for the job that they are able to do, as opposed to maybe the job that they want to do, and they
That's
tend to avoid it. But the fact that you knew, not maybe knew that you couldn't, but just if you put it out there, and so that way you just were able to, I'm going to still do this. I know I can do it, but this is the situation. And I think that then to have someone, which maybe because it's another woman CEO there who's, bringing you along to say, yes, I'm confident, that must have made a, good impact when you first, just to kick you off at least.
yeah, I think any hesitation or fear I had was washed away pretty immediately after that conversation. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
So, well, I know, we've talked about as far as Till Morrison, you guys are the nation's largest home builders, which that's also very impressive. But you also, you post on LinkedIn and you talk about being a CMO and how CMOs sort of have to break the rules sometime, lose the playbook, and really just see what new possibilities are out there. So I want to ask you, has there been a time on a personal level, not necessarily, I mean, it could be about your career, but just not about the work, that you sort of threw away the playbook, broke the rules, and one, has there been that time? And if so, what were those possibilities that you either got to, or maybe are still waiting to get to, or hoped to get to, whatever it may be?
I think more of those moments for me, Lisa, are certainly on the professional side, where I think every role I've stepped in, regardless of position or wherever you are in the totem pole, I've fully embraced every opportunity and have put a lot of ownership into um, making an impact and having influence. So I think I've done it at every level without really being aware that not everyone approaches their work that way. So when I was offered the role as CMO, I had already had, gosh, countless conversations with very successful, smart operators in home building who said, we don't need earned media. We don't need public relations. Branding doesn't matter as long as we buy the right piece of dirt and put the right home on that piece of dirt. It was this field of dreams mentality that these consumers would just show up out of thin air. And I think that model worked for a really long time until it didn't. And it was really just because consumers, the way consumers shop, consumer preferences, behaviors had evolved, but as a business, as an industry, we hadn't. So from a very early age, my mother once told me I was either going to be a journalist or I was going to be a lawyer because I asked so many questions. And so I'm just like inherently curious. And so they would say, this is the way it is. And I would say, but why? And that might be how it was, but is that how it should be? And just posing the questions. And so, not to say that I wanted to intentionally be like an antagonist or
Hmm.
upset people or to prove people wrong or to call a baby ugly. I truly, it always comes from a really good place and with the intentionality of like doing something better. And I think I've approached life that way. I think on a personal level, throwing out the playbook, which is sad that I even have to admit this, my husband is a stay-at-home dad. And I
Mm-hmm.
think still in 2024, that's not as common as you'd see your stay-at-home moms, for instance. And so I don't want to say I've ditched the playbook, but I've absolutely ditched that, stereotypical family makeup.
Yep.
But it was hard, even initially, when my husband and I made that decision for our family. I questioned it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, my oldest is 8. So he's been home now for about 8 years. And it was the best decision ever. And I could care less, honestly, what anyone thinks about our structure and our
Right.
setup, because it's what works for us, for him, for me. It allows me to do what I do and be fully present at work. And when
Mm-hmm.
I'm home, be fully present at home. So I encourage any families or women who tend to be the breadwinner to fully embrace that and
Yep.
allow that to be the story for your family.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think that there's, as you mentioned, the stereotypes. And when you were sort of hesitant about it early on, when it first was coming into play, was it the stereotypes or was it the wanting to stay home with your baby or a combination? I mean, or was it the image? I mean, what came to play that worked in your mind? And then how did you finally say, you know what, this is what we're going to do?
I think it was a lot of those factors. Plus, we were young. I didn't know what I didn't know about marriage, parenthood. I knew early on that I probably wouldn't be a very good stay-at-home mom. So it wasn't the fact that I wanted it, but he was kind of taking that role. I think the hardest part was the weight of the world fell on my shoulders. And I was like, gosh, when we first got married, we were equals financially speaking, right? And then when I stepped into the role and knew that I had this earning power that, to be honest, I didn't even consider for myself, I it was hard to fully appreciate the fact that I could do it and have the confidence that we were going to be just fine, and that my husband wouldn't change his mind, right? Because it's a hard job, and we have a lot of life check-ins where I come home and I want to make sure he has what he needs and he's fulfilled, because if he quits his job, our whole family would turn upside down, right? And so we have those conversations where as long as he's happy, or if he needs certain things to change,
Mm-hmm.
I want to accommodate those so that our family can still hum along in harmony. So I think it was the weight, the responsibility. And every once in a while I'll have a bad day and I'll look at him and I'll be like, gosh, it must be nice. I don't have that option.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we've just grown as individuals and as a couple and as a family. We now have 3 kids. So it's what works, and we've moved through those bumps. And again, it's allowed me to be fully present at work and give my all to my career when I'm here, and that's paid off too, both for myself and for our family.
No,
So
no, it's a great way to be. And especially, I'm not, do you have a daughter?
I have 2 daughters and a
Two
son.
daughters and a son. Okay. So well, I think on both sides, it's wonderful for a son to see women out there working, see his mom out there working and happy, and his dad staying home and happy. But also for your daughters, just to, they emulate you. They're going to look at you and they're going to know they have choices. It's not about that they're not going to
Yeah.
babies, but it's they have a choice.
Yes. And, my mother was the breadwinner. She was a registered nurse, and she retired after 35 years as a nurse, and she worked really hard. My dad actually owned a subcontractor construction company, but his
Mhm.
work didn't flow, right? It was very seasonal. And so my mom was the stability. And so
Yeah.
I watched that and probably internalized it at a young age without really, connecting that. But it's funny that you say that, because I actually see it play out already, because my kids, they're really into imaginative play right now. And so they'll play house, and my daughter will throw like an old Trader Joe's, paper bag over her shoulder and tell my son, like, you're staying home, I'm going to work, right? So they already play it out. And then my
Yeah.
son, who first started kindergarten, which was just last July, we asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. So you could put the cute little chalkboard and take a picture. And so he said he wanted to be a regular dad. So
Wow.
they were seeing and wanting to have kind of a life structure similar to ours. Who knows how that will play out, but it does. And my husband loves it. Like he loves the fact that he's just like, I'm going to work and, we
Hmm.
want our kids. And just last week, we had a new hire training where our executives were invited to do a panel. And one of the questions that was asked, because we actually do have quite a bit of female executives, and that's not common in corporate America, and it's certainly not common in construction where it is kind of male dominated space. What how did you do it, and what advice do you have for your younger self? And I truly, when I say this, I mean it. I never have once considered my gender to be a disadvantage. And I don't know if it's my age, being an older millennial, where I just approached the work with passion and
Hmm.
enthusiasm, and good things have come as a result. I have told my team and my direct reports, and even some of the frontline team members on my team, that I always chased the work. I always wanted an opportunity to make an impact,
Hmm.
and because I've chased the work and I've given it my all and I do my best every day, the titles, the opportunities, the money, they've all come as a result of that. And so I know everyone's story and path is different, but I truly believe that if you chase the work and you just focus on doing the best at what you're doing, all of those other things will come. The
Yep.
minute I see people chasing a title or chasing, certain numbers on their paycheck, it shifts the conversation, it shifts the dynamic. And I feel like that is a huge reason why I am where I am. I also think just I don't want to say falling into, stepping into the position at 33. I didn't
Right.
know what I didn't know, but I continued to chase the work. And I think that, people knowing I wasn't chasing this title that didn't even exist when I
Right.
was here, I think it changes the dynamics, it changes the conversation, it changes the way people perceive you. So I think it's
No,
a
well,
good
oh, but no,
to
it's
follow.
just about following your passion, like following, because ultimately, well, one, you're going to be happier, if you're just chasing that title or the paycheck. Not that it's not nice to have a nice paycheck, but then, maybe it's not, you don't go to work every day loving it or looking forward to it, or, not that you go every day, but, for the most part, if you really enjoy your work, then you thrive, as
Yep,
opposed to, I don't care how much you're being paid, if you don't enjoy it, it's very difficult to really be successful, I think, or at least in your life, you to be happy about it.
absolutely. And I'm having conversations with my CEO now, and she's like, "Well, what's next for you? What do you want?" And I'm like, "Gosh, does it make me sound, not positioned for success if I say I'm really still having a lot of fun doing what I'm doing now?" But I think the great part about having a leader like I have and I emulate for my team is she sees things in me that I don't see or I haven't thought to look for. Right. And I see that for my team members too. But I'm thankful to work for a leader who continues to see opportunity for myself while I'm just focused on continuing to do a great job in my current role.
No, I
So
think that's
that
great.
continues to serve me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, because you talked a little bit about your path, and so I know you not initially started at an agency side, and then you've worked for different brands, but it was very PR communications, at least based on what I'm seeing from your titles. But so then, as you said, now you are the first CMO and comm, so you have that in there, communication. But uh, that's, I said not initially that might have been daunting, but for you, what makes you, so this is maybe the advice you would give to someone starting out and maybe not there, as you said, not chasing the role of CMO, but to be in an opportunity to be successful at that possibility. What would you suggest they do when they're initially getting started, and how, because your path is different, everyone's path is different, but
Sure.
what do you think is that, when you look at it, what was that key factor or key factors that helped you, to do what you're doing successfully?
And I agree with you. I don't have a traditional path to the CMO. I don't have a marketing background or education. And so I saw that initially as a disadvantage when I stepped into the role, and I started attending CMO conferences and they were talking about things that I knew nothing about. And then I saw in that same conference the shift where they were starting to talk about culture within the organization and employee value propositions and getting employees on the same page within your brand. And I immediately shifted that perspective to think that my background is actually a competitive advantage because I'm a storyteller. I have been telling stories, whether true or not, since I was a child, and have always had a passion for the written word. And so, taking a journalism path, I wanted to go into writing for newspaper. Um, really enjoyed more of that long form journalism. I emphasized in PR because I had a teacher, a professor at Arizona State University who was wonderful and opened my eyes to the possibility of that public relations outlet. So that's why I went right into a small agency. But I found, Lisa, early on that I didn't like pretending to know everything about a lot of brands. I would fall in love with one of my brands and just want to go really, really deep there.
Yeah.
I didn't like tracking every 15 minutes of my life. So I ditched that pretty early on, went brand side, but really fell into kind of that employee communication side. So I stepped into a manufacturing organization and a semiconductor firm and knew nothing about what this organization did. But what I told my boss when he hired me, I was like, I'm a quick learner and I'm a really great storyteller. And they were on this path of growth, and their CEO was an engineer and didn't know how to start telling a story or to get people to believe in, this path. And so I started at a very young age, 22, being essentially a ghostwriter for our CEO who had 13,000 employees globally, who he wanted them to all be rowing in the same direction and understand the mission of the organization and how every individual's daily work feeds into that and makes an impact. And so I fell in love with the fact that I'm every day influencing how people feel about how they're spending their days. We spend so much time away from our families. Don't you want to love where you work and who you work for and why you work there? And so I took that job very seriously, and I did that role at the semiconductor. I then went to a Fortune 500 IT reseller, headquartered also here in Arizona, Insight. Did that there, was kind of headhunted into a role at University of Phoenix and the parent company Apollo Education Group doing that. And every time I stepped into a new role, communications was not something that the organization had fully embraced or understood the value. And so I was building the infrastructure for communications within the organization and building a brand from the inside that I didn't even really appreciate the power I was having until I met Cheryl, who's my current boss. And she, kind of recruited me into Taylor Morrison doing just that. She wanted to make sure all of her team members, because we were the product of several mergers and acquisitions. So how do you get everyone to understand who is this newly formed organization? What are we trying to accomplish? She had this growth story that she wanted everyone to understand. And so I did that within the organization here for 3.5 years. And over time started owning the communications with other stakeholders. I started writing her earnings scripts for her investor calls, and I started writing for the board and shareholders. And, the conversation about CMO came very organically because she said, Stephanie, you are communicating to every key stakeholder surrounding our organization, except for arguably one of the most important. And I said, well, gosh, who? And she said, our consumers. Mm-hmm. And so I looked at it as, gosh, you're right. And it doesn't change the story. You adapt it for the audience, right? Every communicator knows the first rule of communication is understanding who you're communicating to. So it was just taking the training that I had grown up with and slightly adapting it for a new audience. And so I thought that challenge, I took it head on and I was like, yeah, let's do this. And the fact that it hadn't really been done in home building, because I would argue that marketing in home building is always very bottom of the funnel. It's a sales promotion, it's an incentive, it's a red tag sales event. It is buy now. And so I was flipping the narrative of brand doesn't matter. Well, it does if you have 3,500 employees who live and breathe your brand, which we had spent 3.5 years creating and cultivating. And now they're our biggest brand ambassadors. And it made all the messaging and the brand story and narrative that we built inside, it made it so easy to push it outside. Because I truly believe that your employees are your biggest litmus test, and they can sniff bullshit faster than anyone else. So if they don't believe it, it won't work outside. So doing it backwards just wouldn't work. So I can sit here now 5.5 years later in the role knowing that my background is actually a competitive advantage for this brand and any other brand that I were to step into.
Yeah, and I do think that, being able to adapt is a huge player in, or, you know, something that people need to be in order to be a CMO. So that's a trait that whether you have it in your 20s, just starting out in whatever position, and then to lead up to that and being able to then, and I think also picking, assessing your talents. I think a lot of people want that cookie cutter person, and that's a problem. If you're looking just to hire that, when there's so many other people who can have all those skill sets and be even better because they bring another angle to the table.
Yeah,
People need to be open to that. So,
agree.
all right, I want to have a little fun in terms of, again, I always, as I say, do my snooping on LinkedIn. So
Good.
one I first want to say, it was just a quick thing that you had said, that sometimes in marketing, again, it's time to shake things up. Now, I really want you to go on the personal level, not on the job, not with what you're doing at Taylor Morrison, but what's the most recent thing? And it could be just a little thing, but that you did to shake things up in your life.
Oh gosh, shake things up personally. Um, so much easier applied to the workplace, but if I had to pick a thing, I think it was, parents typically fall into the routine of, you get home, it's bath time, dinner time, bedtime, and that mundane routine can feel it's probably the hardest. They call it the witching hour, I think intentionally, because it's the hardest part of the day, I think, for parents. And it was just setting these expectations or having these expectations of my children to do exactly what you want them to do when you want them to do it, and realizing I as an adult don't do that. And so I think shaking it up for us was really like letting some of the reins go and letting the kids kind of lead, which seems a little, there's certain parent philosophies. You could be more authoritarian or gentle and whatever rule book you follow. That's essentially kind of the playbook I wasn't following, that I chucked out the window. And I think I gave myself permission to just parent how it felt authentic to my children. And I don't like to hover. We were like hovering over our kids to brush their teeth and get their pajamas on. It just put so much stress and pressure. So I think I ditched the playbook of like trying to be this perfect parent and follow the rules and follow this strict time frame and get them in bed by 7:15, and knowing that my kids will tell me what they need when they need it. So it's more like letting them play a role in the relationship. And so it might sound silly or fluffy, but I do think personally it's given us more freedom. It's allowed me to, take a breath when I get home and not feel so stressed after a long day at work, to step into this more regimented routine. I do think kids need structure, but I don't think they need it quite as deliberately as I think we were trying to follow. So I think I chucked out that playbook and said, I'm going to let my kids play a role in this, and I'm going to sit back and take a minute when I get home.
Very good.
That's probably it.
Yeah. Well, I noticed, I want to get to this. I need to read this because, again, it's from LinkedIn. Now, you wrote at the end, dedicated wife, mother of three, voracious reader, social good enabler, coffee lover, wannabe yogi, and Fleetwood Mac fanatic. All right, so we're going to have a little rapid round. So,
Okay.
this first thing that pops in your head. No, just like boom. All right. So, what's the last book you read for fun?
So I adamantly try not to fall into the Colleen Hoover phrase, but I kept hearing that all her books were really great. And so I did. In 1 week read It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us. And they were actually really great. I actually just started reading Without Merit, also by Colleen Hoover. So I'm probably going to turn into a Colleen Hoover fanatic too. But they're great reads.
That with Fleetwood Mac. All right. How about for your career?
The last, I'd say, more professional book I read, it was Win Every Argument. And I think it's because I picked it up because I really feel like in marketing and just in the professional space, the art of debate, I think we've lost it. And there's a good way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And so I picked up that book and it was a really, really fast read. And it's just, I think, as a professional, as a human, knowing how to argue, because now I translate a lot of those skills even in my personal life with my husband and my children, but certainly at work in marketing and what I do every day at Taylor Morrison. I'm debating and persuading and trying to influence people all the time. So that was probably the last and most insightful book that I've read professionally.
All right, great. So favorite coffee?
I drink black coffee. And
Black.
that's why quality coffee is so important. You'll never see me at Starbucks. And no offense, I love the brand, but their coffee is just not very good. Unless you put in a bunch of sweetener and milk and calories, and I don't have any time for any of that.
That's me.
And that you're the one adding to the bottom line for Starbucks.
Yeah, no, it's not Starbucks. I'm an East Coast girl, Boston girl, so Dunkin' Donuts. I'm Dunkin' Donuts. But even with that, I know it's a much more milder blend and whatever, but I'm still like lots of cream. Like I'm like 5 squirts. You have some Splenda or whatever, like like it's just, and I throw a little cinnamon, like it's a whole little concoction because I think I don't particularly like coffee. Probably it's just more I like that morning time to have my coffee.
So every morning I have a hot Americano. So I have a Jura machine at home, which I love. It's like my favorite part of my morning routine. But here in Arizona, and I think it's more West Coast maybe, but Dutch Bros, I think has the best tasting coffee. Like, what is that? The experience is kind of skewed more towards the younger generation, but their cold brew is so good, and you can drink it black. Most cold brew you can't because it's either overdone or underdone, so it's either bitter or burnt. But Dutch Bros is my favorite.
I still probably people have said that this is so smooth you'll be able to have it. It's kind of like someone saying this whiskey is so smooth you'll be no problem. Yeah, it's not happening for me. So all right,
acquired taste.
Yes, definitely. What cause are you most passionate about?
Injustice, and I think there are a few organizations that I donate a lot of both funds to, but I tried early on before having 3 kids to also donate my time and my profession and kind of my craft to organizations. There's the Innocent Project and the Equal Justice Initiative, and it's really about wrongful convictions and making sure that people get a fair and equal chance. I think the justice system needs work. So that's probably the cause that I spend the most amount of time when I have time to focus on and give. It means I don't have any personal experience, but I empathize with all those folks, and that system needs some help.
That's wonderful. And just to start the last of the rapid round, favorite Fleetwood Mac song?
Well, I would tell you that my favorite album is Rumors, and I think
that one.
Yes, it's hard to argue. And then Go Your Own Way is probably one of my favorite songs, and also like a life mantra. Funny story on Fleetwood Mac. When I'm my father's only child. I have a half sister. My mom had 2 kids, and my parents were both huge Fleetwood Mac fans. So that music was just on all the time growing up. But my dad wanted to name me Stevie, and they were going to. And then in the delivery room, my dad was just like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want her to grow up hating me because I gave her, like a quote unquote boy's name." My father's name was Stephen. So I named Stephanie after him instead. And I still curse him. I'm like, "Why didn't you name me Stevie? That would have been so cool." But
it would still work with a nickname, Stevie, Stephanie, like it kind of,
So I should just now at 38 start telling everyone.
I'll in the introduction, I'll say, okay, I have Stevie here.
I'm going to pick that up and do it now. My son, his name is Wesley, and he's 6, and now he's already telling me I have to call him Wes. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. I thought I had until he got into sports or high school, but
Yep.
it's Wes now. So
No, but I always I hate, that's one thing. Lisa didn't have a nickname. Everyone in my family had nicknames, Debbie, Deborah, Debbie, William, Billy. And
yes,
for me, it was Lisa. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, I mean, I'd get Lee once in a while or Lise, but like, it wasn't a nickname you'd write. So I always miss that. So I think Wes has a good thing going there.
yes, it does.
So I want to ask one last question, just finally. What is it that people get wrong about you? Is there anything when they first meet you, they might assume something, and then after a bit, they're like, no, not so much.
I have heard time and time again in my career at different stages that I am very intimidating. And every time I hear that, I'm always like super confused. But apparently, I put out this aura of this like overconfident, very ambitious, and I guess somehow that translates into intimidation. And so I think once people get to know me, they realize that I'm very humble and I have imposter syndrome and I doubt myself and I know I don't have all the answers. And so I think, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing because I wouldn't say maybe confidence, I'd say conviction. I'd show up with a belief,
Yeah.
and that's always very intuitive and organic and authentic. And I will use my voice, but it's not this just full cup of confidence. Um, and so that's probably something that I guess, yeah, I just get so surprised. I have my vice president of brand marketing was like, God, the first time I met you, I was so intimidated. I didn't want to talk to you. I didn't want to stand near you. And I was just like, gosh, that makes me feel awful. I don't want people to feel that way about me. But she even said, like, gosh, the minute you get to know you, like,
Yeah.
it's totally different. Totally
Yeah.
different.
Well, I mean, as a woman, especially in business and in a position that you have, it's not a bad thing to sort of people to look to you. They have confidence in you. They can trust you. And
Yeah.
then, but you also, as you said, you want them to feel comfortable to open up and discuss with you. So the fact that then that comes in. But I think women, especially, maybe put up that bit of a wall or that of confidence or maybe a little overconfidence that they may not actually be feeling inside just to, sort of make it their way. But
Yeah.
so Stevie,
Oh,
I think okay.
yeah.
So, well, Stephanie, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your story with me. And thank you for watching. And as I always say, if you know anyone, any woman brand marketer who you would love me to sort of pull the curtain back on, please let me know. I will do my best. And again, thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Lisa.